The orchard was quiet the morning they came for him. Sunlight barely touched the rows of withered apple trees that lined the Vale property, their branches trembling under a thin skin of frost. It was early, 6:14 a.m., when the convoy rolled in, unmarked sedans, a van from the crime lab, and the slow rise of dust trailing behind. The air smelled faintly of diesel and fallen fruit, a sweetness turned sour by time. Detective Marisol Trent stepped out first, her breath fogging in the cold. She didn't look at the cameras or the reporters camped at the gate. She only looked at the house. One story, faded yellow paint, curtains drawn. 43 years of silence lived inside those walls. A voice over the radio confirmed, "Unit in position. Proceed." The sound that followed was almost delicate. The creak of a gate, the crunch of gravel, the distant barking of a dog that sensed something human and wrong. When the team reached the door, it opened before they could knock. Thomas R. Vale stood there. He was older than any of them expected, stooped shoulders, wire glasses, the look of a man who had spent years mastering stillness. He didn't flinch when the warrant was read, didn't resist when the cuffs clicked. His eyes drifted past Trent toward the orchard stretching behind her, as if searching for someone long gone. Inside, the house was a museum of quiet order, everything labeled, dated, aligned. A calendar from 1986 still hung on the kitchen wall. Next to it, a set of irrigation blueprints rolled tight and bound with twine. There was no computer, no phone. Only the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of a refrigerator filled with nothing but bottled water. Forensic officers began to sweep the place, moving carefully, speaking in low voices. The sound of gloves brushing over drawers, the faint whir of a camera shutter. Each click echoed like a confession. Trent wandered toward the back window. Beyond the glass, the orchard stretched for acres, rows carved in symmetry. Morning light filtered through the mist, washing everything in a pale, sterile glow. It looked peaceful, and that was the most unsettling part. One of the younger officers called out from the hallway, "Detective, you'll want to see this." She followed the voice into a narrow storage room. Inside, wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes marked by years. 1977, 1981, and 1985. Every box was numbered and sealed with masking tape. On the top shelf, dust-covered jars of soil samples were arranged like trophies. Trent took a step closer. Each jar had a location written in fading ink. Modesto, Stockton, Kingsburg, Fresno. All familiar names, all crime scenes. Her gloved hand trembled slightly as she lifted one jar. Inside was something pale and fibrous, perhaps rope fibers, perhaps something else. Beneath the jar lay a notebook, edges curled with moisture. She opened it to the first page. Neat handwriting, measured and clinical. Control the flow, control the life. Water, like memory, leaves traces. No signature, but it didn't need one. By the time they led Vale out of the house, the orchard had thawed under the rising sun. Reporters shouted questions, microphones pushed forward. He said nothing. He only paused for a moment at the edge of the gravel, looking back at the rows of trees swaying in the light. His lips moved slightly, almost like a prayer, but no sound came out. In the lab, 3 hours later, a technician unsealed an evidence envelope marked 1982B. Inside was a fragment of fabric taken from one of the earliest crime scenes, a remnant that had lain dormant in storage for decades. When the sequencer screen lit up, a faint green waveform pulsed across it. A match was forming. The room fell silent as data assembled itself into proof, each number aligning like constellations after a storm. Outside, dawn stretched over the city. Somewhere in that orchard, the branches stirred, a slow rustling, like the earth itself exhaling. After 43 years, the case that haunted half of California had finally found its voice. To understand how this began, we go back to 1976. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now. It helps us bring more truth to light. Before the name Orchard Phantom filled headlines, before California locked its doors at night, there was simply a young woman named Anna Lee Moran. She was 24, a school teacher in Kingsburg, and she lived in a rented farmhouse bordered by almond trees. People who remembered her often mentioned how she laughed with her whole body, shoulders, eyes, even the tips of her fingers. Nothing about her life suggested she would become a headline. Her days followed a rhythm as quiet as the town itself. Each morning, she left the porch light burning even after sunrise. Her neighbor once teased her about wasting electricity, and she smiled, saying it helped her find her way home on dark evenings. That small light became her habit, a soft beacon in the valley's wide silence. Anna taught literature to middle school students. She loved the texture of paper, the scent of chalk, and the way the classroom windows caught the afternoon sun. On her desk sat a small ceramic apple her students had given her at Christmas, painted unevenly, glazed with fingerprints. Every Friday, she wrote one line from a poem on the board. That week's line came from Frost. "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep." Her students didn't know it would be the last one she'd ever write. After school, she often visited her parents in nearby Modesto. Her father was an auto mechanic who never stopped worrying about his daughter's long drives along the farm roads. "Stay on the main route," he'd tell her, wiping grease from his hands. "Too many empty miles out there." Anna always promised she would, but she liked the orchard roads. She said they calmed her, the scent of fruit and soil, like something older than fear. In her spare time, she painted, not landscapes or portraits, but the small things people overlooked. A teacup's chipped rim, a garden hose coiled in sunlight, an apple fallen half buried in dirt. Her canvases were gentle, precise, and her brushstrokes so soft that colors seemed to breathe. Her landlord sometimes found her outside at dusk, sketchbook on her knees, painting the way light dissolved into the rows of trees. On weekends, she wrote letters to her sister in Oregon. The letters were full of small details, her students' mischief, her neighbor's new puppy, the music on the radio. The last letter ended with a single line: "I think I'm finally learning how to be alone without feeling lonely." That letter arrived 2 days after she vanished. The day before her disappearance was bright, the kind of spring day that makes everything look temporarily forgiven. She stopped by the local grocery store after work. The cashier, a boy she'd taught years before, remembered her buying apples, bread, and a single candle. She said she was planning to grade papers that evening and needed some quiet. At 6:10 p.m., her friend Dana called. They talked about a field trip for their students. Dana said Anna sounded tired but peaceful. She mentioned that she'd noticed a blue pickup truck parked near her road several nights in a row. "Probably some farmhand," she joked. It didn't sound like fear. More curiosity, like someone noticing a bird that returns to the same branch every morning. At 7:45 p.m., another neighbor saw her on her porch, writing something in a notebook. The porch light was already on. She waved when a car passed. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later, investigators would reconstruct her final hours from fragments: the half-eaten apple on the kitchen table, the radio still playing softly, the candle burned almost to its base. Her students' essays were stacked neatly beside her typewriter, the top page marked with red ink that stopped mid-sentence. The house was untouched, no signs of forced entry. Only one thing was missing: her car keys. They were found 3 days later, half buried in a ditch less than a mile away. In the weeks that followed, the town turned inward. People double-checked locks, trimmed their hedges so the streetlights could reach farther, but inside the classroom, where Anna once taught, her desk remained as she left it. The ceramic apple, the Frost quote, the papers no one could bear to throw away. Her parents refused to move. They kept the porch light burning every night for 20 years. It became something of a local symbol. Drivers passing through Kingsburg at night could spot the faint golden glow in the distance, steady as memory. When Detective Trent later reopened the case, She found that same ceramic apple stored carefully in an evidence box. The glaze had dulled, but the fingerprints remained embedded beneath the varnish. That small object, handmade by children, seemed to hold more humanity than the entire investigation that followed. There were hundreds of victims in the Orchard Phantom timeline, but Anna's name always lingered near the beginning. She was the one who changed the way people locked their windows, the one reporters described as the first confirmed case. Yet for those who loved her, she was never a case. She was a woman who painted fallen fruit and believed a light left on could make the world feel less empty. Her sister once said in an interview years later that when the call came from the cold case unit confirming the match, she didn't feel joy. She felt stillness. It wasn't victory, she said. It was finally knowing the shape of the silence. The file on Anna Lee Moran became the cornerstone of the investigation, her life reduced to dates, photographs, samples, and coordinates. But to the people who remembered her, she was always more than evidence. She was the porch light that refused to die out. That night in 1976, the one she never returned from, the orchards were in bloom. Petals drifted across the roads like snow. Somewhere in that white hush, a single car pulled over, and the valley's silence deepened into something that would last for decades. The night Anna Moran disappeared, Kingsburg slept beneath a sky the color of ash. The temperature dropped suddenly after sunset, the kind of chill that makes sound carry farther than it should. According to police logs, the last verifiable contact was her phone call at 6:10 p.m. At 7:45, a passing driver saw her on the porch, notebook in hand. After that, the record becomes a collection of silence, speculation, and traces. At 9:03 p.m., a neighbor named Harold Givens reported hearing a car idling too long near the Orchard Road. He didn't look outside. At 9:26, another resident half a mile away noticed a flicker of headlights moving without pattern between the trees. None of these details meant anything at the time. They became important only when the valley woke to an absence. At 7:12 the next morning, Anna's principal called her house after she missed a staff meeting. No answer. At 8:30, a colleague drove by and saw the porch light still burning. By noon, the sheriff's office had a missing person report. Deputy Ellis was first on scene. His field notes later became a model of 1970s rural police procedure, handwritten, methodical, and painfully incomplete. He noted the open notebook on the porch chair, the candle stub on the table, and the faint scent of apples drifting from the nearby grove. The door was unlocked. Inside, nothing was broken, nothing stolen. The kitchen clock had stopped at 9:31, its battery corroded and leaking into a small pool on the counter. Her car remained in the driveway, keys missing. A single tire track curved away from the property gate, too shallow to determine make or model, but consistent with light pickup tires. Investigators photographed it, then watched it fade under the sun. The living room showed signs of interrupted routine. A sweater draped over the couch, a half cup of tea cold on the table, the radio still playing faint static. The record of her last played song was found on the turntable, The Long and Winding Road. The stylus had been grinding the label for hours, leaving a shallow groove that looked almost like a scar. No struggle, no blood, just vacancy. By afternoon, a small team from the county sheriff's office began a search grid across the surrounding orchards. The trees stood in perfect rows, too symmetrical for comfort. The soil was dry and compact, broken only by irrigation lines and fallen fruit. The searchers spread out at 50-foot intervals. Dogs sniffed for scent trails, but found only faint traces that ended abruptly near the old irrigation canal. At 4:40 p.m., they located her handbag under a thicket of low branches about 200 yards from the house. The contents were undisturbed: wallet, receipts, lipstick, a note written in her neat teacher's script. Paper due Monday. It was folded into a square, edges soft from handling. That small ordinariness struck the searchers harder than anything else. When daylight failed, the sheriff called for floodlights. The beams cut through the orchard rows like white corridors. It was then that they noticed something strange, the way the leaves shimmered on certain trees as if coated with a fine dust. One deputy brushed a branch and realized it was residue, fine, pale powder mixed with moisture. Forensics would later determine it was lime, used to mask odor. The orchard owner swore he hadn't treated the trees that month. At 7:22 p.m., the dogs caught a faint alert near the canal bank. Searchers converged, shovels in hand. The soil was soft, recently turned. Beneath a shallow layer of leaves lay a piece of blue fabric, torn and mud-stained. The tag identified it as part of a cotton dress from a local department store. By 9 p.m., they had uncovered what remained of Anna Moran. She was positioned carefully, not hurriedly. The wrists were bound with shoelaces, double-knotted. Her ring was still on her finger. Forensics would note minimal trauma, an indication of precise, controlled violence. The estimated time of death between 8:30 and 9 p.m. The orchard was sealed off. Reporters gathered outside the police tape by morning. The county's lead investigator, Captain Raymond Cole, arrived before dawn. He walked the perimeter without speaking, his flashlight cutting through mist. He noticed the faint tread marks crossing the canal road, two different patterns, as if one vehicle had followed another. Cole's field report described the scene as meticulous. He underlined the word twice. The soil had been raked smooth after burial, as though someone obsessed with symmetry couldn't bear the sight of uneven ground. On one tree branch near the site, a small fragment of cloth clung to the bark. It wasn't from Anna's dress. Later testing identified it as a piece of canvas work glove coated with hydraulic oil. The clue went nowhere. The county had dozens of agricultural workers using identical gloves. In the following weeks, the investigation became a ritual of repetition. Interviews, dead ends, fatigue. The community's silence thickened. No one saw a truck that night. No one noticed strange behavior. The orchards looked the same every morning. The trees too numerous, the spaces between them endless. Captain Cole built a timeline. He logged the call, the neighbor's report, the discovery, and the autopsy. He mapped the distances with a compass and string on his office wall. The result looked like a web stretching across the valley, converging on a single point. A half-mile stretch of canal road, accessible only by service workers. He began to suspect the killer was someone local, someone who knew irrigation schedules and gate codes. The pattern suggested familiarity, patience, and confidence, but the county lacked DNA testing, and the physical evidence, fibers, footprints, fingerprints, yielded nothing identifiable. By late summer, the file was labeled inactive pending leads. Anna's case joined others like it, similar bindings, similar settings. The newspapers coined a name, the Orchard Phantom. The phrase stuck because it explained everything and nothing at once. 2 months later, Cole revisited the Moran property. The family had moved out, unable to bear the sight of the porch light still burning. The house stood empty, except for the classroom apple that someone had placed back on her table. Cole walked through the rooms again, retracing her last known path, the hallway, the porch, the gate. He paused at the threshold and noticed something he hadn't before, the faint outline of soil tracks, barely visible on the wooden boards. The prints led not from the house outward, but inward. Someone had entered, not waited outside. He took photographs, filed them, and never found a match. Years later, when Detective Marisol Trent would reopen the case, those same prints would resurface during digitization. The lab software would overlay them against archived images from another scene, dated 1981, and discover they matched within a margin of 98%. The thread connecting decades of fear would begin with that overlooked pattern of dirt on a porch. But in 1976, none of that was known. The official report closed with a single line in Cole's handwriting. Unknown subject demonstrates ritual behavior, clean burial, deliberate order, no signature object left behind. He was wrong about the last part. Months after the burial, when workers began pruning the orchard near the canal, one of them found something caught in the roots of a young tree, a small metal irrigation tag stamped with a code, KV47B. It matched the waterline sector that ran directly beneath Anna Moran's property. The tag had been removed from its pipe and carried here deliberately. Investigators logged it as debris. No one realized it was the same code etched decades later on the suspect's notebook, the one recovered from his shed in 2019. For 40 years, that tag sat sealed in an evidence envelope, unnoticed until technology gave it a voice. The investigation into Anna Moran's murder stretched on like a frayed thread, pulled, examined, and left to tangle. From 1976 through the early 80s, the Kingsburg Sheriff's Department chased ghosts. Each new lead promised resolution and ended in exhaustion. The first suspect was a farmhand named Daniel Cruz. He had worked near the irrigation canal and matched the approximate height reported by a witness who had seen a man walking along the service road that night. Cruz was quiet, solitary, and had an old conviction for trespassing. Under questioning, he seemed confused by the attention. He kept repeating that he was on the night shift, tending pumps at a different farm. The times didn't line up perfectly, and for a while, detectives convinced themselves they'd found their man. When his employer produced a time card stamped for the same hour, Anna vanished. The case against him dissolved. The district attorney's office withdrew the warrant quietly, leaving Cruz's name permanently attached to rumors. He left town 2 months later. In 1978, the case file thickened with tips. A drifter was picked up in Modesto carrying a woman's scarf and several newspaper clippings about the murder. He confessed within hours. Too quickly, too smoothly. When details didn't match, detectives realized he had memorized the news articles. He was charged with filing a false report and sent to a state hospital. The real investigation remained where it had always been, nowhere. Detective Raymond Cole refused to give up. He drove hundreds of miles between jurisdictions, comparing patterns. By 1981, he had identified 5 similar cases across neighboring counties. Same bindings, same ritual placement, same geographic corridor following irrigation routes. He called it the Waterline series. His superiors called it coincidence. The sheriff's office was under political pressure. Each failure drew criticism. Reporters began to speak of incompetence. Cole's notebooks filled with names, suspects, witnesses, dead ends. One entry read simply, "We keep circling the same orchard." That same year, Cole received a call from the Bureau of Criminal Identification in Sacramento. A partial fingerprint from Anna Moran's porch matched one found in an unsolved burglary. The man's name was Thomas Vale, a field engineer for the Water District. Cole tracked him down and interviewed him in a diner off Highway 99. Vale was polite, articulate, and almost helpful. He claimed he'd worked maintenance in the area in the late 70s, but left after layoffs. His alibi placed him in Bakersfield the week of Anna's death. Cole noted nothing suspicious except Vale's composure. In his report, he wrote, "Logical, technical mind, unemotional." With no evidence to hold him, the lead was archived under non-probative. In 1983, a local journalist reignited public interest with an article titled "The Phantom in the Fields." It portrayed Cole as an obsessed detective chasing patterns that didn't exist. The department reassigned him to property crimes within months. His files were boxed and stored in the basement. He retired 5 years later, convinced the killer was still alive. For the families, time was less procedural. Anna Moran's parents spent their savings on private investigators. They hired one in 1984. A former highway patrolman who promised fresh eyes. He lasted 6 months. His final letter to the Morans said, "There's nothing new to find. The orchards have erased it all." The community learned to live around the fear. Locks replaced latches and curtains stayed drawn. In 1986, another young woman was found near Visalia. Same bindings, same calm precision. The press tied it to the orchard phantom, but investigators argued jurisdiction. Files moved between counties like luggage on a carousel, never arriving where they should. In one interview from that period, a sergeant explained the exhaustion. "You don't realize how heavy silence gets until you carry it for years." Through the 90s, advances in forensic science hinted at hope. DNA testing emerged, but only for fresh evidence. The samples from the 70s were too degraded, stored in conditions no one trusted. Each attempt to test them ended with inconclusive results. The case aged into myth. In 1994, the Sheriff's Department received an anonymous call from a woman claiming her ex-husband had confessed to doing something bad in Kingsburg back in the 70s. The man, a truck driver in Arizona, was arrested on unrelated charges. Investigators drove out, hopeful again. He denied everything. The woman later admitted she'd been drunk when she made the call. Another file was added to the mountain. By 1997, the Cold Case Task Force briefly reopened the Moran file, pairing it with 5 others under a new project called Valley Trace. A consultant from the Department of Justice reviewed old forensic evidence, hoping technology could salvage something. He discovered that one of the original samples, item 47B, had been mislabeled and stored separately. It was logged as fiber control rather than biological material. Lacking funds, they postponed retesting. The file closed again in 1998. The families of victims met once a year for a remembrance vigil. They lit candles along the canal road, the same path where Anna had been found. Sometimes, a detective would attend in uniform, standing quietly at the edge. The Morans came every year until their health failed. After their deaths, their surviving daughter continued the tradition alone. She once told a local newspaper, "People think grief fades, but it doesn't. It just gets organized." By 2001, the term orchard phantom had entered local folklore. High schoolers told stories about seeing him at dusk. Police dispatchers joked grimly when they received calls about shadows near the orchards. The real case existed only in cardboard boxes and memory. When new detectives inherited the cold files, they approached them with detachment. One memo in 2004 read, "No active leads. Recommend long-term evidence storage review." Another, in 2007, noted that several smaller counties had destroyed non-probative items to clear space. Kingsburg kept theirs by accident, the same accident that would one day make justice possible. Detective Marisol Trent joined the department in 2017. By then, she had grown up hearing about the phantom like a bedtime warning. On her first week in the cold case division, she pulled a random box from the archive just to understand what the older detectives called paper ghosts. The label read 1982B. Inside was the misfiled envelope containing the degraded sample. At that point in history, no one imagined it could speak again. The years between Cole's retirement and Trent's discovery were a landscape of attrition. The investigators changed, but the case did not. Files yellowed, evidence bags clouded. The orchard grew back over the canal where Anna was buried. A retired deputy who had once searched the fields summarized it best: "You can't keep hope alive on paperwork." In 2010, an FBI agent reviewing unsolved cases proposed a DNA correlation project. The Kingsburg files were suggested but ultimately excluded due to cost. That rejection letter remained stapled to the back of the evidence log, a bureaucratic scar that outlived several sheriffs. Families moved, remarried, aged. The children of victims became parents themselves. They spoke of the murders in careful tones, as if too much volume might wake the past. The Moran's farmhouse decayed, the porch light finally burning out in 2015 when the wiring failed. The bulb was never replaced. Detective Trent would later say that when she first opened Cole's notebooks, she felt like reading another person's exhaustion. He had written, "If I can't find him, maybe the next one will." The next one did. But at this point in the story, that moment still slept inside the evidence vault, waiting for a hand steady enough to unseal it. The official record for the year 2015 lists the Moran file under closed, no further leads. The final page bears an officer's signature and a printed note in standard language. All reasonable investigative avenues have been exhausted. For everyone who had carried the weight of Anna's case, that sentence meant both defeat and relief. When the clerk stamped the closure, the sound echoed faintly down the hallway, one more door shutting on history. No one noticed the faint hum of the refrigeration unit behind the evidence room, still cycling quietly, preserving a fragment no one believed mattered. The temperature inside never changed. The silence waited. In the years after the investigation closed, life in Kingsburg rearranged itself around what could not be explained. The orchards grew thicker, the roads smoother, and the sound of sprinklers at dusk became the town's only constant rhythm. For those who had known Anna Moran, every sound still carried her absence. Her parents aged quietly. Her father stopped working at the garage after his hands began to tremble. Her mother filled notebooks with daily thoughts addressed to her daughter, letters no one would ever receive. They began simply, "Dear Anna, it's raining today," or "The porch light is still working." Over time, the entries turned smaller, as though the words themselves had learned to whisper. Her sister Elaine moved to Oregon, but she wrote every Sunday. The letters were careful, almost ceremonial. "I'm still waiting," she would say at the end of each one. When her mother passed in 1989, Elaine placed all those notebooks into a box and brought them north. She kept them in her attic, labeled in neat handwriting, "Anna's Light." The world changed while the files slept. Telephones became smaller, then vanished into pockets. The valley's water district digitized its maps. Satellite images replaced hand-drawn blueprints. What had once been farmland turned into housing tracts. The canal where Anna was found became a paved walking path lined with benches and ornamental lights. But underneath the concrete, the same irrigation line still carried water through the roots of the old orchard. In the 1990s, a small local newspaper revived interest in the case with an anniversary article. The headline read, "20 Years Without Answers." The story was short, built mostly from public records. Still, people cut it out and taped it to their refrigerators. For many, it was not about remembering the crime, but about refusing to let time erase the name. Elaine kept the clipping inside a glass frame on her kitchen counter. She said it reminded her that memory was an act of work, not just love. "Forgetting is easier," she told a friend once, "but forgetting would be a second death." Every few years she drove south to visit her parents' old house. By then it was empty, the walls stripped, the garden dry. The porch light no longer worked, but she sometimes stood there holding a flashlight, letting the beam fall across the same boards where the investigators had once found soil prints. The wood had warped with heat, but the pattern was still faintly visible. In 1999, a true crime journalist named Peter Dalton arrived in town. He was young, ambitious, and fascinated by unsolved rural cases. His book proposal described the phantom as a ghost of order and silence. Elaine met him once at a diner. She answered his questions, but when he asked what she hoped the book might achieve, she said, "Maybe it's not about catching someone. Maybe it's about keeping Anna real." The book never sold. Dalton moved on to other stories. But in one of his unpublished drafts, he wrote a sentence that would later resurface in the reopened case. "The orchard remembers more than the people do." By the early 2000s, the evidence boxes had been moved into a climate-controlled facility on the edge of Fresno. Technicians were cataloging old files for digital conversion. Each item received a barcode. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and unnoticed by the outside world. Among those boxes sat one labeled 1982B, containing the untested swab from Anna's drape. No one looked inside. The computer log simply marked it archived. Elaine grew older, her hair turning silver. She kept her sister's belongings in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed, letters, photographs, and one of Anna's small paintings of fallen apples. The colors had faded to brown and gray, but when light struck it just right, you could still see the soft strokes of yellow beneath the surface. She refused to call the annual vigil a memorial. "It's not over," she would tell the few who still came. Sometimes 5 people, sometimes only 2. They stood along the canal, candles in hand, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and fruit. No speeches, no slogans, only silence, and the flicker of small flames mirrored in the dark water. As decades passed, the children of Kingsburg learned the story differently. Teachers no longer mentioned names. The local museum displayed a short plaque about the cold case of the valley. People stopped locking doors again. Time, as it always does, rewrote memory into folklore. But the Moran's house refused to vanish completely. When the city rezoned the area, the property was purchased by the county and converted into a temporary archive for agricultural maps. Ironically, the man who inventoried those maps in 2015 was an intern in his early 20s, a generation born long after the murders. One evening, while scanning old irrigation plans, he noticed faint hand-drawn coordinates on a blueprint from 1975. The name in the corner was familiar from the case file, T.R. Vale. He mentioned it offhand to his supervisor, who shrugged. "Probably just an engineer," the man said. The intern made a note anyway. Strange coincidence. Same surname as that cold case from Kingsburg. That small curiosity would become the invisible bridge connecting past to present. In those lost years, hope was not loud. It lived in paper, in flickering porch bulbs, in the quiet persistence of those who refused to let a line go cold. Elaine once said she could tell the seasons by how quickly her memories of Anna surfaced. Spring was hardest, apple blossoms, and the scent of soil after rain. She described it as being haunted by something gentle. When she was 70, she received a letter from a detective in Fresno named Marisol Trent. It was short, formal, but respectful. "Mrs. Reeves, my unit is reviewing older forensic samples as part of a new technology initiative. We'll be re-examining evidence from the Moran case. I cannot promise results, but I wanted you to know it's being looked at." Elaine held that letter for days before telling anyone. She kept it propped on her desk beside a framed photo of her sister at age 24. The letter had no date for testing, no mention of DNA, only the phrase "new technology." But it was enough. She wrote back in careful handwriting, "Thank you for remembering." Outside her window that night, a light rain began to fall, the first of spring. The orchard paths in Kingsburg were empty, but in the evidence facility miles away, a refrigeration unit maintained its perfect chill, holding on to the sample that had outlived every detective who had handled it. Elaine didn't know it yet, but the story she had kept alive through candles and letters was preparing to breathe again. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop an emoji in the comments. The discovery began quietly, not with a confession or a clue, but with a spreadsheet. In 2019, Detective Marisol Trent sat before her computer in the Fresno Cold Case Unit, cross-referencing archived inventory against the digital database built for the state's new genealogical DNA initiative. Line 47B appeared on the screen with a note that read, "Biological residue, status unknown." The code was familiar. It matched the same tag mentioned in Raymond Cole's last memo from 1981. Trent retrieved the evidence personally. The box was dust-coated, the seal yellowed but unbroken. Inside was the manila envelope, the same one she had seen years earlier during her first week on the job. The label, written in fading blue ink, simply said, "Porch Drape, Moran." She delivered it to the regional forensic laboratory on a Friday morning. The technicians weren't optimistic. Biological samples that old rarely survived, and many had been contaminated by handling before modern preservation standards. But protocol required a chain of custody review, and the sample passed every check. It had remained sealed since 1976, untouched for 43 years. The lab's senior analyst, Dr. Lena Chow, decided to test it using a next-generation sequencing process, an advancement capable of reconstructing partial genetic markers from degraded samples. She placed the fragment under a microscope, noting its brittle fibers, and began the slow extraction process. Hours passed. The lab's quiet hum filled the air. Through a process of microamplification, fragments of DNA began to replicate, forming patterns across the monitor. Then, something unexpected happened. The system's spectral graph showed a coherent profile forming, weak but legible. Chow leaned closer. The computer's interface displayed the message. Partial match, STR consistency at 13 low CI. It wasn't enough for identification, but it was enough for hope. Trent authorized a parallel run using a forensic genealogy service partnered with law enforcement. The data was encoded, anonymized, and uploaded into the Family Link database, a vast network built from public genealogy submissions. The search algorithm combed through millions of sequences looking for relatives. For 3 days, nothing appeared. Then, on the 4th, a single match surfaced, a user from Oregon named Rylan Vale, sharing approximately 3.4% of the DNA sequence. The system flagged him as a possible second cousin to the unknown subject. Trent's pulse quickened as she read the surname. The name Vale had appeared before, on an old interview transcript from 1981. Cole had spoken to a water district engineer named Thomas R. Vale. The connection was too precise to dismiss. With legal clearance, investigators obtained a discarded coffee cup from Rylan Vale's home through cooperation with local authorities. DNA testing confirmed the partial match, establishing a direct paternal relationship. That meant the unknown suspect from the Moran case was an older male relative, likely born between 1945 and 1950. The database cross-search narrowed it further. Employment records placed a Thomas R. Vale, born 1948, in Kingsburg during the late 70s, working for the California Water District. He had retired in 2004 and was still living in the Central Valley. The next step followed the cold case procedure perfected in the age of forensic genealogy. Officers conducted a covert trash collection outside Vale's property. Among the discarded items was a used tissue. DNA extracted from it produced a full profile. When compared against the sample from Anna Moran's drape, the match probability exceeded 1 in 700 million. The confirmation printed in black and white, match confirmed, source individual, Thomas R. Vale. The air in the lab seemed to pause. Years of speculation, paperwork, and silence had collapsed into a single, undeniable fact. Detective Trent called the district attorney's office. The words she chose were plain, procedural. "We have him." The arrest followed within days. Vale, now 71, lived alone on the edge of his former worksite, surrounded by the same orchards he once maintained. When approached, he offered no resistance. He only asked one question. "What finally told you?" Trent replied, "Your DNA did." At the station, Vale sat beneath the sterile light, calm and almost detached. During interrogation, he said little. The transcript from that day contained only one notable statement. "I thought I buried all of it. Turns out I only buried time." In the evidence review that followed, investigators revisited items from the old case files. One detail stood out: the irrigation tag found in 1976, stamped KV47B. When analysts examined Vale's old notebooks recovered from his shed, they found the same code etched into the margin beside a schematic drawing of water lines. The number wasn't random. It identified the sector of the irrigation system that passed beneath Anna Moran's property. Vale had marked it as completed. That connection sealed the narrative. The engineer had used his intimate knowledge of the irrigation network to navigate the orchards unnoticed, timing his movements between scheduled pump rotations. The pattern of his crimes matched the water system itself, a grid of control and flow. He wasn't hunting victims at random. He was moving through his own infrastructure. When the case broke to the public, the reaction was subdued rather than explosive. Most people in Kingsburg had long stopped believing justice would ever arrive. For them, it felt less like a revelation and more like an exhale. Elaine Reeves received the call at home. The detective's voice was calm, deliberate. She listened without interruption. When the officer finished, she asked for the man's name to be repeated. Then she said quietly, "I remember that name. He came to check the water line behind our house once." The silence on the line stretched. Elaine thanked the detective and hung up. She didn't cry. Later, she told a local paper, "Justice doesn't make you happy. It makes you steady." In the months that followed, the state compiled the formal case summary. Vale pled guilty to multiple counts of murder and assault in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. During sentencing, Trent sat behind the families in the courtroom. When the judge read the charges aloud, Vale simply nodded. Outside, news crews waited for reactions, but most families declined interviews. They didn't want spectacle. They wanted silence to mean something new. Forensic analysts documented every step of the process in the final report. It began with a misfiled envelope, a persistent detective, and a machine that could read the language of decay. It ended with proof so irrefutable that even time surrendered. In the official case debrief, Dr. Chow was asked what moment stood out most to her. She answered, "The first pulse on the monitor. That little flicker meant the past wasn't dead yet." That flicker became the defining image of the investigation, the heartbeat of data reviving memory. Months later, Elaine attended the reopening of the Orchard Memorial Site. The city had installed a plaque bearing her sister's name among others. Beneath it, a small line read, "Identified through DNA analysis, 2019. She placed one of Anna's faded paintings at the base of the plaque, a picture of fallen apples and afternoon light. As the sun set behind the trees, the petals drifted like ash and then settled. The air smelled faintly of fruit and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a water pump started its cycle, its steady rhythm echoing through the soil, a reminder that everything moves in patterns, even justice. Hit the like button if you believe justice always finds its way. The courthouse in Fresno stood under a cloudless sky the morning the proceedings began. People gathered in silence, not out of curiosity, but from the quiet gravity that accompanies long-delayed truth. Inside, the walls seemed to hold the weight of 4 decades, the echoes of names that had lived too long in reports and file boxes. Thomas R. Vale was led into the courtroom wearing a plain gray sweater. Age had hollowed his frame, yet there remained a kind of structure to him, an engineer's precision, even in frailty. He glanced once at the gallery, scanning faces, but there were few left to recognize. Most of the families had grown older, moved away, or learned to live without faces for their grief. Detective Marisol Trent sat behind the prosecution table, her notebook closed, her posture straight. It had taken 3 years from the DNA match to reach this moment. The charges listed 13 counts of murder, numerous assaults, and a long record of connected cases once thought unrelated. The trial was less about argument than confirmation. The prosecution's case was built not on emotion, but on data. They projected the digital DNA graphs onto a screen, spiked lines in blues and greens. Each curve mirrored another, a pattern of inheritance, proof that science could remember what memory had forgotten. The lead forensic analyst explained the genealogy link, tracing how the partial DNA from a drape connected to a living relative and, ultimately, to Vale. The courtroom remained still as the evidence unfurled. Photographs of irrigation maps marked in pencil, the recovered notebook with codes, the glove fiber with hydraulic oil. Each item was displayed in order, methodical and unemotional, the way Vale himself had once arranged his crimes. When the prosecutor asked him if he wanted to make a statement, Vale's response was brief. "You already know what I did. You just needed a better microscope." The judge asked if he wished to apologize. He shook his head. "Apologies are for mistakes," he said. "I was deliberate." No one gasped. The silence in the room was heavier than any outburst could have been. Elaine Reeves sat near the back, her hands folded over a worn letter. She watched the man who had taken her sister's life speak without regret, and for the first time she felt nothing resembling hatred, only distance. The kind of distance that time grants when pain has burned itself out. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor didn't appeal to vengeance. She spoke of process, of evidence preserved, of persistence that outlived failure. "Justice," she said, "is not a clock that runs out of time. It is a compass that eventually points true north." The defense offered no denial. Their case was reduced to the facts of age, health, and the futility of punishment. Vale pled guilty under a negotiated agreement that spared him the death penalty. The court accepted the plea. During sentencing, the judge read from a prepared statement. For crimes committed over decades, concealed by precision and silence, the court imposes 13 consecutive life sentences without parole. His voice didn't rise, didn't tremble. The words fell like stones, solid, final. Vale listened with the same composure he had maintained throughout. When asked if he understood, he nodded once. Completely. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones extended. Detective Trent stepped through the crowd without speaking. A reporter shouted, asking how it felt to close the case that had haunted the valley for nearly half a century. She paused at the steps and answered quietly, "It's not about closing, it's about letting truth breathe again." That night, news anchors across the state repeated the phrase, "Truth breathes again." Inside the evidence lab, Dr. Lena Chow reviewed the final documentation before transferring the biological samples to permanent storage. The sequence code now carried a name, a conviction, and a date of closure. She signed the log with deliberate care. For her, it wasn't triumph. It was the completion of a conversation between the living and the dead. In Kingsburg, the orchard that had once hidden the crime was now public land. The city council dedicated it as a memorial park. Rows of apple trees still grew there, but a narrow walking path wound through them, lined with plaques bearing victims' names. The irrigation pump still ran, though the pipes had been replaced with modern equipment. Its steady rhythm had become background music for the living. Elaine visited the park in early spring. The air smelled faintly of soil and rain. She walked the path slowly, her reflection passing across the polished metal plaques. When she reached Anna's name, she placed the small ceramic apple, her sister's old classroom gift, beneath it. It had traveled with her for decades, through moves and years and grief. Now it belonged here. She whispered, "You can rest now. The world knows." Later, she wrote a letter to Detective Trent. "Thank you for not letting her become statistics. For finding the science that remembers what people forget. Trent framed the letter and kept it above her desk. Whenever she worked late, she would glance at it, a quiet reminder that persistence was not measured in results, but in the refusal to stop asking questions. As for Vale, he was transferred to the state penitentiary at Corcoran. Within months, his health declined. His only request was to be allowed access to paper and pencils. The guards said he drew irrigation lines and orchard maps in his cell until his hands could no longer hold the pen. He died 2 years later, his ashes unclaimed. The file, now marked closed, conviction secured, was archived in the same facility that had once misfiled the evidence. The cycle completed itself neatly, like an equation solved at last. In the decades that followed, the story of the Orchard Phantom became less about murder and more about endurance. Students studying criminal justice read about the case as an example of forensic genealogy's power. The phrase long-awaited DNA appeared in textbooks describing the turning point in cold case investigation history. At the annual remembrance ceremony, Detective Trent spoke briefly. "Justice," she said, "isn't loud. It doesn't shout when it arrives. It's quiet, methodical, and patient, like the machines that helped find it." The audience stood in silence, candles flickering in the wind. The orchard trees swayed gently above them. For a moment, it was hard to tell whether the sound was leaves or applause. That night, the city lights shimmered across the valley, each bulb a small act of defiance against darkness. In one house, far from the courthouse and the cameras, Elaine turned off her porch light for the first time in 43 years. She didn't need it anymore. In the years that followed the trial, the story of the Orchard Phantom no longer belonged to the fear it once inspired. It became a different kind of tale, one about persistence, patience, and the strange way that truth waits for those who refuse to stop looking. Detective Marisol Trent continued working cold cases. Her desk stayed neat, a small ceramic apple resting beside her files, a gift sent anonymously after the conviction. She never confirmed it, but she believed it came from Elaine. When the nights grew long, the object reminded her that what began as a case had ended as a restoration of something deeper than justice. Elaine Reeves spent her remaining years quietly in Oregon. She tended a garden filled with apple trees, each one grown from seeds she collected on her visits to Kingsburg. Visitors said the trees bloomed early, before any others in the neighborhood, and their fruit was smaller but sweeter. She once told a neighbor, "It's not about the trees, it's about keeping what was lost alive in another form." The Orchard Memorial became part of the town's daily rhythm. Joggers passed the plaques each morning. Children played beneath the same branches that had once hidden darkness. Tourists came expecting tragedy and left speaking of endurance. Every spring, the air filled again with the scent of blossoms, a fragrance that blurred the line between sorrow and renewal. The files that once defined the investigation now sit preserved in a temperature-controlled archive, labeled with a single word: closed. Yet in their stillness lies proof of a quiet miracle, that human hands, guided by data and faith in process, can make time itself answer. For the investigators, the case became a parable about precision and empathy existing side by side. The lab technicians who once watched the pulse of DNA light up still speak about it with reverence. "It felt," one said, "like listening to the earth exhale." And for those who had carried grief across decades, closure did not erase memory, it transformed it. Kingsburg no longer feared the night. Porch lights stayed on for comfort, not vigilance. The hum of irrigation pumps became the sound of continuity, not concealment. Every spring, when petals drifted across the memorial path, the orchard seemed to whisper a single truth: that justice, like water, finds its level eventually. It might take years or lifetimes, but it moves toward balance, drawn by something unseen yet constant. The final photograph in the county archive shows the orchard at sunset. The trees are heavy with fruit, the sky pale gold. In the corner of the frame, the old irrigation pump stands motionless, retired but intact. Its metal gleams softly in the fading light, like a relic of both destruction and renewal. Stories like this do not end in triumph. They end in equilibrium, the living learning to coexist with what time left behind. The orchard remains, not as a monument to death, but as proof that patience can be an act of love. Which case should we tell next? Leave your suggestion below.